Cheers from Japan, Tokyo Toy Bastard here. Cracking open some cheap diet fake beer because I'm broke and I'm on a diet. So first, let's have a swig. All right, and now let's get to business. So today I'm going to be talking about vintage Star Wars figures, specifically reproductions and reproduction customs, because there's a bit of a difference here. All right, and I know this is a touchy subject with a lot of vintage Star Wars collectors. I am a vintage Star Wars collector, but my opinion resides somewhere on the fence with this. But as you will see, I actually really like some of the things that are being done today in the realm of vintage Star Wars reproduction and customs that are not official. And speaking of that, Hasbro has just announced and shown off at Toy Fair 2019 their new line of 6 reproduction vintage Kenner style figures and a new Grand Moff Tarkin figure, which is in the vintage Kenner style. So that's cool. Collectors who don't want to spend hundreds of dollars to buy a reproduction carded figure and still get an official release, they're happy. However, fans that collect vintage only and don't want loose bits of those things going off into the market and being sold as vintage for lots of money on eBay are not as happy. Although there are ways to tell, and a lot of that's nitpicky. And there's two sides to the argument. And like I said, I'm kind of on the fence, but anyway, I'm enjoying some of these things. And I'm actually here to promote some of this stuff because I actually think that what they're doing is better than what Hasbro is doing, outside of the fact that Hasbro is now doing, finally, a Grand Moff Tarkin figure. Although you have to buy it in a fucking box board game that no one wants, probably. Alright, excuse my language if you're a new viewer. This is Tokyo Toy Bastard, so obviously this is not for children. This is for adult collectors. And so yeah, let's get into this stuff. So so going back to repros, the very first repro thing of Star Wars that I ran into were, of course, the weapons. And I remember reading online forums about how repro weapons would sink and the originals would float, or vice versa sometimes. I don't know, but I think that was basically the thing that I kept hearing. And you know, if I went and bought a figure and I paid a lot of money for it, I was kind of hoping that it was an original weapon. So several years back, I had this vintage Luke Skywalker Return of the Jedi figure that came with the original lightsaber, and this is from someone that owned it owned it as a child and sold it to me. They were like, "This is legit." So I trusted them, and one day we had an earthquake or someone bumped into my toy shelf. This is Japan, so we have things get shuffled around, and it fell out of the hand off of this case, or the case that I had previously here, and I assume it got vacuumed up, or the dog ate it, or my kids took it somewhere, but I haven't been able to find it. So I wanted to find something to replace it because I wasn't going to go pay a bunch of money for another one. Because maybe I'd find another one eventually, or I'd find the one that I had eventually for a better price. So I wanted to have a cheap replacement. So I dove headfirst into the world of reproductions. Later, I wanted to display some of my vintage toys on card on the wall because I was running out of space and I thought they looked cool on cards. So I did some purchasing reproduction cards for pretty cheap. And, you know, they're very obvious, the reproduction cards. You can tell that they're used. But there are people that will fall for buying them on the, the online marketplace if they are not smart enough or don't know the telltale signs. So needless to say, I've abandoned most of my carded reproduction carded figures. I only have one, and I just can't give it up. It's a Luke Skywalker in Bespin Fatigues original figure. Original Weapons, but he is carded on a reproduction card, and I keep him high and away, and I'm not selling him, so no one will ever get tricked by that. Anyway, flash forward. I run into eBay seller on eBay, and I believe the manufacturer for these toys, and I saw these all over eBay a couple years ago. They were called Crazy Toys, and they were producing reproduction vintage Stormtroopers. And unfortunately, I've traded all mine off. I bought a bunch of them just to make a little army, but I've traded them all off to friends knowingly that they were reproduction, because there were some things that were a little bit different. But basically, they were reproductions of this. This is an original one. Reproductions of this original Stormtrooper. And the telltale signs were, I believe the backing, where the date was a bit distorted, but I don't believe that they had removed it. I think it was just kind of distorted. And another thing is they were like super white, and they also had kind of a ratchet joint. Like this one has just a regular joint, but they had like click, 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 so you could tell that they were reproduction. And also the heads were slightly thinner, if I remember. But anyway, so I had now entered into the world of reproduction Star Wars toys. So about a year or so later, I was kind of done collecting vintage Star Wars. I had gotten most of the figures I wanted. I had little bits of vintage reproduction weapons here and there. And then one thing caught my eye that was actually not reproduction per se of an officially released toy. It was a custom kit bash, factory-made action figure of Boba Fett, as Boba Fett appeared on some of the original Star Wars card backs that had the mail away Boba Fett advertisement, and it was this figure right here. So, and this was produced by a company called Pro Custom Figures that is very active on Facebook and eBay, and they are currently working on a lot of reproduction Ewok toys from the Ewok figure line. But if you're not familiar with the vintage Boba Fett or the kit bash Boba Fett, or either or, you can see that they are very different figures. And this figure was made out of a few different figures that were previously produced by Kenner, and they just kind of mishmashed them together, repainted things, sculpted a few new things, and this was what appeared on the promotional artwork. And this group, Pro Custom Figures, had this factory made. I'm assuming they took all the original parts, but it had it factory painted and factory produced, and it has a original rocket firing mechanism, which I will fire into the camera, and hopefully I don't lose the rocket. Well, it just kind of fell down. And it's got a spring mechanism. And but yeah, that's cool. But that's not, no one's gonna fall for this. There were 300 of these, I believe, made, but it's not vintage. But they were pricey. Those were like $80 if you bought it like in a little premium box. And then also around that time, I actually started working together with Has No Talent bootlegs of now Instagram fame, but at the time they were selling on eBay. And we partnered up and we produced some of our own Boba Fett figures, vintage style rocket firing figures. He had already made some. I did some custom colors and some custom card backs, and we had a collaboration. But obviously you couldn't mistake them for vintage because they look completely different. You can find links to those. I'll put the links to those in the bottom if you want to see them. They're all gone. They were very limited amounts. But Has No Talent is still selling build your own Mandalorian kits where you can buy different color pieces of Boba Fett and put them together, make your own figure. Okay, so we're almost to 10 minutes now, and I haven't even really introduced the figures that I really want to talk about, but thank you for being patient. So about 2 weeks ago, my good friend Dave from Toy Polloi, I'm sure a lot of you guys know Toy Polloi, he comes out to Japan and we hang out fairly often every year, and he showcased some figures that really piqued my interest, and I actually immediately went online and bought one and got in contact with the seller. So the seller of these are on eBay, and his name is Chris365, and I will put that on I'll put that on the description, the link to that. But he produced his own Stormtroopers. However, this Stormtrooper is more than meets the eye, because he's a reproduction of Luke Skywalker in Stormtrooper disguise. So, if you know anything about this figure, you know that these are pretty hard to find and pretty rare. And if you watch my other channel that I'm involved with, Kentucky Fried Gaijin, we actually found one of these a couple weeks ago, right before I saw Dave's Toy Poloi's video, and it was missing the helmet and the gun. It was on a loose card back, and it was still pretty crazy price. And that's here in Japan, but still. So I was wondering, I don't know if I want to pay that much for this, but lo and behold, a couple days later, I found one that looked identical and in better condition for a much better price, and by someone that knew what they were doing and making these really amazing figures. Just like, look at the sculpt. It's basically an original transfer of the original, original mold transfer of the original figure, and it's all been factory made, factory painted. These are not just kit bash customs. These are made the traditional way, injection molded plastic in iron molds, I believe. But yeah, this looks great. So, but this is a reproduction. However, the back does not show any date stamp. I know it's hard to see on my camera, and it's after midnight here, so. But there's nothing there, so you can tell that if you're a hardcore collector, there's no date stamp there. So this is obviously a reproduction figure. So if you get scammed without asking about looking at the date on the back, sorry. Okay, so here's where things get interesting. So real quick, I'm going to do a quick comparison here. So you've got the original Stormtrooper. I don't have an original Luke Stormtrooper, so this is the best you're going to get. But you can see the color difference is quite apparent. He's a bit more yellow, and this is one of the best ones I could find of all the years I've been collecting vintage Star Wars. But I mean, the molds are similar, but this Luke's a bit more beefy, and he's not as stern like that. However, they did make another Luke and Stormtrooper disguise in 1995, and this is the one that I grew up with playing because I completely missed this line, and it was too obscure for me to even know about when I was in junior high school. So let's look at the two faces in comparison. Dave and Toy Poloi compared the original version versus this reproduction, but since I don't have it, you can look at beefy He-Man, Luke, and also not one of the best Luke's face sculpts. That's not this. This is not the fault of the person producing these. Just the original face sculpt was kind of funny looking, and that's well known to collectors. But vintage collectors are not looking for realism. They're looking for that nostalgia and those simpler times when toys were toys and not what they are today. Okay, so here's where we move on to back to the custom part of this deal. So one figure they never produced in that last 17 line that included that Luke Skywalker was Han Solo in Stormtrooper fatigues. They never made him in the original Star Wars line, so until 1995, when they produced this Luke, just imagine this, but you take off the helmet and it's Harrison Ford. It was the same figure, but in the original line, the vintage line, they didn't make one. So Chris365, also known as Smith Lord Creations, also created his very own Han Solo in Stormtrooper attire. And he looks great. He also produced these on a card back, a custom card back, because these never existed, and it also looks great. If you want to see that, go to Toy Poloi's video, and he showcases one of those. But Chris from Smith Lord Creations graciously sent me this one just to check out, and I'm glad because honestly, having Han and Luke together is amazing, and I would have eventually had to grab this anyway. But interesting to note, the Han is essentially the same body as the Luke. I mean, yeah, it's the same body. But they used the small-headed version of the original 1978 Kenner Han to replace the head. And, not the best lighting, but you can see that those are essentially the same, slight differences in, the mold retaking and the paint. But yeah, it's the same head. It's also somewhat similar to the Han in the indoor fatigues, and I actually didn't pull him down, but I think it is the small head Han from 1978. Okay, so anyway, those are amazing figures. I am super stoked to have them and stick them up in my collection, and I'm not sure if I want to stick them in my Imperial Army, my little group there, and have them like kind of peeking out, or stick them with the heroes. I'm not sure where I'm going to stick them yet. But he also sent along, Chris also sent along a bunch of reproduction weapons. So as you saw with the Luke, I didn't put it in Han's hand, they all came with Imperial blasters. And he sent along 3 different variations, which I'm not sure how well these are going to pick up, but there's a solid black one. And these reproduction blasters are actually really well done, and I compared them to some of the ones that I've had, some originals and some semi-decent reproductions, and these are way closer to the originals, which might make some collectors a bit angry, but if you want to complete a bunch of your figures, you should definitely pick these up. And these are available, I believe, on his eBay site and also on his website. And I'll link all that stuff down at the bottom. But again, his eBay seller name is Chris with 2 S's, 365, Smith Lord Creations. And then he has a website too called thefanstrikeback.com. So the second variation was this dark blue one. And you can see here, dark blue and black. And the third one was a slightly lighter blue color, which is honestly my favorite color of all these weapons because I just like brighter colors. But let's see, let me just get these, the dark blue and this blue here. Hard to tell here with my camera, but anyway, there's 3 different color variations. And he also does these amazing reproductions of the original telescoping lightsabers in the correct colors, because often if you see reproductions of these, they have terrible colors and they look really cheap, but these all look great. And they've got the little handles at the end. And if you are a pro collector, there are ways to tell that these are not vintage and these are reproductions. And he's not trying to, the seller's not trying to say that these are vintage. He is selling them as reproductions for you to display your stuff with. So just to give a couple examples of why you might want to buy something like that is, I have this Bespin slash, well, let's see. Yeah, it is Bespin Luke, but he's got Yoda on his back. So I've got this, well, I'll just hold it here. So this is actually a reproduction. And it's not bad. It's not bad. I don't know if you can see the details in the bottom. It's not that great. And then I got the one from Smith Lord Creations, and it's a much better color yellow. I know you can't tell in my camera, but the handle has way more detail, and it's slightly longer. It should be it's the size that it should be. And it fits just a little bit better in his hand, because this one, the other one I had, was just a little bit too small to fit in his hand correctly. It would always fall out, but this one fits perfect and looks amazing. So if you wanted to upgrade your reproduction weapons, especially the lightsabers, yeah, this is the best place to do it. And he sells them all in big sets. And also, if you already have some vintage lightsabers and you want to, in the case where, Kenner didn't pack the right colors with their lightsabers until later in the lines, you can have some extras instead of spending crazy amounts of money for them. So, for example, that uh, Return of the Jedi Luke that I mentioned earlier that I lost a lightsaber on. So I have this lightsaber. This is one of the reproductions that Has No Talent did for his pop-up droids that he released in crazy colors a couple years back. But since, you know, the pop-up droid R2-D2 is the one that shoots it to him, I thought it was good that he would have this, and it fits really well in this hand. However, if you wanted to replace it with the original blue lightsaber that Return of the Jedi Luke came with, you can give him that, and you don't have to spend a ton of money, and it looks cool. For now, I'm going to go with this one. But one figure that never came with a lightsaber that I wish it did, and now I have that problem solved, is the Indoor Luke. And it came with a blaster and a belt and a non-removable helmet and an awesome poncho, and just got that robotic hand just open, waiting for something to grasp. Hey, now I've got a accurate green lightsaber to put in his hand, and he is set to go fight some Ewoks. Oh, well, yeah, fight some Ewoks, because that's what they do. They beat the Ewoks at the end of Return of the Jedi, and the galaxy is saved after they kill all the Ewoks. But yeah. So, reproductions are not evil, and now that Hasbro is doing them, they're going to become very commonplace. It's not the first time they've done them, but this will be on a more massive scale. So I think it's something that fans have to get used to and have to identify and decide whether or not they want to, you know, purchase things like these. But in some cases, things that Kenner never made, like this and this, these are definitely well worth your time and your money, because these are amazing, and I have no regrets for purchasing these. So that's all I have to say. I think I'm going to continue drinking this, and then I'm going to post this video online, and then I'm going to go to bed, because it is now, yeah, well after midnight. Cheers from Tokyo, and good night.